One thing I really like about this bank is how much everyone genuinely cares about their customers and about the community and about each other. Always trying to put ourselves in the customer's place. What would I expect if I were the customer? And then we try to take it up a few notches from there. And it's kind of like being part of the family when you're banking with us.
Let's pray. Strong and loving God, today we thank you for the blessing of living in community, for the privileges we share, even the challenges we work through together. Keep us alert to our responsibilities to enhance and strengthen the safety as well as the freedom of every citizen, the freedom to live without fear, the freedom to achieve every dream, and in doing so, remind us of your sacred call to protect and nurture and provide a place of hospitality for the most vulnerable among us, our children. May our discussion and decision-making always be informed by your grace. May we never react from a posture of fear, but trusting in your strength and the goodwill of one another. Let us always respond with eyes that see the big picture, in ways that reflect your far-reaching wisdom and your own vision of a just, peaceful, and secure society for all people. Let us now listen, share, and know that in your steadfast love, that all things are possible. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
Thank you very much. If you join me for the pledge of allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to the regularly scheduled meeting of the Amarillo City Commission, held this day at 5:30 on the third floor of City Hall. The first item of business on today's agenda is the minutes. Attached is a copy of the minutes, and those minutes are for the regularly held meeting for November 29th, 2011.
Mayor, I would move for approval of those minutes as presented.
Second. Any discussion or corrections regarding the minutes? If not, all those in favor of the minutes?
Aye.
Opposed? That passes with a 4-0 vote. The next item on the agenda is the public hearing proposed sex offender residence ordinance. This item conducts a public hearing on the proposed sex offender residence restriction ordinance. This proposed ordinance, as currently drafted, would restrict individuals who are required to register with the Texas Sex Offenders Database because of certain convictions involving a minor child from establishing residence within 1,000 feet of a licensed daycare center or defined premises where children commonly gather, such as schools, parks, public recreation areas, and others. This hearing is supposed to present information and data regarding the proposal and to solicit and receive input for consideration. If I could, I would ask the city manager to proceed with information so we can all understand this better.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. We're glad to do so. The item that we have today, with your permission, would start out, the city attorney and myself would kind of walk us through what this draft ordinance says, what it does, whom it would impact, I think probably just as importantly, whom it would not impact. Take us through that. We also have Police Chief Robert Taylor with us today. I'm going to ask the Chief to move up to the front. I think we're going to need him here in just a little bit. We'll have him available as a resource. So we'll walk through this, stop them, and display a series of maps, and then maybe stand for any questions, comments from the Mayor, the Commission, or the audience. So with that, Marcus, if you would please take us through, as drafted, what the ordinance has in it, again, whom it would apply to, whom it would not, and then I'll talk about a few of the items that we've learned that are not in that ordinance that we would suggest they be included. So, Mr. Norris?
Yes, sir. I may set a little bit of the context, that's important for the discussion. In the past 15 years or so, the United States Congress has enacted approximately a half dozen laws, beginning with Megan's Law, that place restrictions on child predators, on criminals who commit certain crimes against children. It began at the federal level because of the prevalence of federal grants. You began seeing requirements that states enact such laws as a condition of receiving certain types of federal grants. The state of Texas, heeding that directive, has enacted several statutes creating a sex offenders database, creating authority with the parole board to set requirements on parolees. They have enacted a separate statute that enables probation officers or community supervision to impose similar restrictions on the residency of persons on probation. The shortcoming of that law, in the view of some people, is that once the offender is off of parole or off of probation, they are no longer subject to those restrictions. And so some cities have stepped in to adopt ordinances that will continue that residency restriction. For example, you cannot live within 1,000 feet of a park, school, daycare center. Have passed ordinances, city ordinances, to continue those residency restrictions on those persons on the state registered sex offender database who committed crimes against children. So that's the background for the ordinance that is coming before us for discussion this evening. The ordinance does set a 1,000-foot restriction on a daycare center. And the ordinance defines daycare center as a commercial daycare center. It does not apply to the home centers, licensed home care facilities. Those are more difficult to identify just at a glance. An offender might move to a neighborhood unaware that the home with 6 children in the yard was a home daycare rather than just a large family. So to make it easier to enforce and to make the requirements knowable very easily, the draft requires it to be a commercial child care center, like I think we would all understand. The database is not a city database. We do rely completely upon the Texas Department of Public Safety sex offender database authorized in state law. Other places where children commonly gather are also included within this 1,000-foot restriction. Such places as a public or private school, a park, a youth center, a swimming pool open to minors, a video arcade. Those are all identified in the ordinance. There are definitions provided for those in the Texas Health and Safety Code. We don't need to repeat the definitions in this ordinance because our police officers are already familiar with those definitions, because that list comes right out of the drug-free school zone statute. And those definitions are all there in Chapter 481 of the Health and Safety Code. The ordinance does not prevent an offender from driving by one of those locations. It prevents them from having a permanent or temporary residence. And residence is defined as 14 or more consecutive days. As we said, it only applies to certain offenders. Again, we borrow from state law, we borrow from other cities who have adopted these types of ordinances, and it specifies in the ordinance the types of offenses, types of offenders who would be subject to this restriction. For example, indecency of a child, sexual assault, aggravated sexual assault, prohibited sexual conduct, online solicitation of a minor, compelling prostitution, sexual performance by a child. It also lists unlawful restraint, kidnapping, burglary of a habitation. Although it's not written into this particular draft, staff will be recommending that we qualify those as being kidnapping with an intent to commit a sexual act, or burglary habitation with that intent, or unlawful restraint with that intent. So it is only certain offenses, again, aimed towards protecting minors, offenses aimed towards victimizing children, that will qualify an offender to be subject to this ordinance. The ordinance does have several exceptions. It would not apply. A person could live within 1,000 feet if, for example, prior to the effective date, the person had fulfilled all the requirements for being on the database. We're only going to use the database, so if they're no longer on the database, they're not subject to this. If the person was not required to be on the database or was a minor when they committed their offense, this ordinance would not apply to them. This would not apply to them if the offender is already living in a location, and then later a daycare center opens within 1,000 feet. This person who was lawfully present may remain there. They did not choose to go live next to that daycare center. It chose to come open up near them. Likewise, there's an exception if an offender is able to show us that there was an error in the state database. We would recognize that they are not required to abide by this ordinance. And then finally, if the person is subject to either community service, that is probation or parole, or a court reduces that 1,000 foot, the probation officer, parole officer of the court specifically says, we find that you may live at this location that's X feet from a school, etc. We, the city, are going to try to trump or get into a legal debate with these state agencies or the state courts. That's not our purpose. Mr. Manager, did you want me to go into some of those details about ages?
Let's hold off on that for a minute. I guess to recap where we are, the ordinance would apply to those offenders who are not a minor now, or who were a minor when the offense occurred. Further, unless the offender is out of those classes, it would only apply if their offense was with a minor, which for the purpose of this definition would mean the victim was 16 years of age or younger, as it's written today.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. And based on the discussion that we've had at the staff level and input from the City Commission, as Mr. Norris noted, there are already a couple of things that we think could be clarified better. On the second page of the ordinance, the definitions of unlawful restraint, kidnapping, burglary of habitation. Mayor and Commission staff have further suggested today during the work session that this ordinance should properly include a waiver process that would account for the inevitable situations of which a black and white approach would not fit. In other words, the offender is 18 years of age, they're not in a correctional facility, they are able to live with their family. If the ordinance prohibits it because that family home is within the 1,000 foot, there should likely be a waiver process to accommodate that, to keep them in that support structure. There were a couple of other items that were also suggested if you would get in really quickly as it relates to the waiver.
Sure. The other waiver proposal was also another ground for a waiver from this 1,000-foot restriction would be if the address were a bona fide job requirement or requirement of probation parole. We've already got probation parole in there, but there may be a job a person would accept and they're required to live on the premises, so that it's some sort of not watchman, caretaker kind of capacity. If it's a bona fide job requirement, that might be eligible. Another one of the exceptions would be if it can be shown that this was a personal residence owned by the applicant at the time he or she was charged with the offense that resulted in registration. In other words, it's their long-time, well-established residence. And that would be a consideration. other factors that would be weighed in deciding whether to grant a waiver of those situations would include such things as the applicant not being listed as a high-risk offender on the state database, that no element of the offense for which the applicant is on the database occurred at that location or within 1,000 feet of it, not want to let the person return as it were to the scene of the crime to live there. So in a nutshell, those are the types of things we would look at in our waiver process.
Okay, thank you. As always, Mayor, this is presented today as a public hearing. This is the opportunity both for the public and for the Mayor and the Commission to ask any questions that they have and to see if we can clarify. Mayor, would you like us to go through the definition that had earlier been discussed on the question of statutory rape?
I think that would be helpful.
Okay. With that, I'm going to ask the city attorney a question that has arisen since last week's discussion. Is what about the case where the offender was under this because of what's commonly termed statutory rape, which is not a legal term, but I think that's a good question. You're talking about a potentially consensual act between individuals over the age of 14 but under the age of 17. So Marcus, if you would walk us through that.
Well, statutory rape is an informal phrase. You seldom find it in any state laws. It's not used in Texas law, but it is a commonly shorthand phrase used to describe the situation when teenagers have the sex. In Texas, you have to begin with the premise, the understanding that the age of consent is 17 years old. It's the number that the Texas legislature selected to say that at the age of 17, we believe you have the emotional maturity to make that decision. We believe you have the ability to understand the consequences of your action, and we will recognize that you may consent at the age of 17. So, two 17-year-olds have sex, there's no crime. Parents may not like it, but there's no crime there. That each one had legal capacity to consent. The legislature, recognizing that some teenagers will have sex before 17, and you don't want to totally brand and ruin a child's future because of a heated moment as a teenager, they write in an exception. This is what we call statutory rape. The exception in the sexual assault law says it is an affirmative defense if the victim was at least 14 years of age or older, and the actor was no more than 3 years older than the victim. We're not going to convict you of sexual assault of a child. So think through the geometry there. If the victim is 14, that statute says as long as the other actor is no more than 17 years old, that is within 3 years, we're not going to have a rape case. But a 15-year-old may have sex with someone up to the age of 18, and it won't be a rape case. A 16-year-old can have sex with someone up to the age of 20, and it will not be a rape case under Texas law. 19, excuse me, do the math, for the 3 years. I was already thinking ahead of the next one. So a 16-year-old, in this exception, it says if you're 14 or older, and the other actor is within 3 years of age, that's an affirmative defense to sexual assault. We're not going to call that rape. It is a rape only because the statute says someone had sex without consent. Remember, you can't give consent till you're 17. And so it is legally impossible for a 15-year-old to give legal consent for sex. And so as a matter of statutory definition, that's an offense, even though he or she was very willing. So it's statutory rape. There was consent, but it wasn't effective consent. So it meets the statutory definition of sexual assault. But we're not, we, the legislature, the public policy of this state is we're not going to prosecute under 14 years of age. So how does that fit in with this ordinance Basically, if it's a statutory rape situation, they also are exempt from this, having to meet the 1,000 feet. We're not going to make a 17-year-old who had sex with a 15-year-old now have to move away from their parents because their parents live next to a school, or next to a park, or next to a daycare. If it's good enough for the Texas legislature to not bring that child in a statutory rape situation, we felt it prudent that the ordinances of Amarillo also recognize such state laws. That's the proposal.
Okay, Mayor, with that, any questions that you and the commission have, any additional information you'd like us to put up, we'd be glad to do so. We do have maps placed around the room at 3 different restriction levels. Your draft is at 1,000 feet. The middle map is 750, and the other one is at 500 from those particular areas. With that, Mayor, Commission, anything we can do?
I think at this point, if there's any additional items for the commission to add for this discussion, then I'd certainly like to hear from the audience, people who would like to make comments. Because our point here today is to gather information so we make a proper decision about protecting children in our communities. Anything from the commissioners we'd like to first hear from the audience?
Maybe the city manager can explain what percentage of the city those different maps represent.
Certainly, we'd be glad to do that. And this is based on total coverage. This does not add nor subtract the land that is consumed by roads, parks, etc. The city limits of Amarillo contains a little over 54,000 acres of land. The 1,000-foot map encumbers 23,308 acres, and that's about 36.25% of the city as a whole. The 750-foot map encumbers 18,127 acres, and that's about 28.19%. The 500-foot map encumbers 12,609 acres, and that's about 19.6%, again, of the total mass of the city, total area.
And we did not want to see we asked at first for a 1250 map and a 1500. We did not look at those because they have not been upheld in state court. Is that right? Can you challenge?
Well, I think the most accurate way to say it, Mayor, is that the mainstream of cities who have adopted these types of ordinances, and when you look at our Texas statutes, they all use 1,000 foot. And there is strength for comfort in numbers. The majority are in 1,000 foot. There are a few at 750, there are a few at 500, and there's even fewer that go higher at 1,200. 1,000 foot seems to be the sweet spot of these types of regulations.
And how many Texas cities currently have something like this?
I did not do an exhaustive study, but I did go through a methodology. There were approximately 1,100 to 1,200 cities in Texas. I was able to find that 70 cities have adopted these types of ordinances. I suspect the number could be higher than that. I had some limited resources and time to do the study. Based on the pattern of hits and misses I was doing the search, it might be upwards of 100 to 125 cities that have these types of ordinances.
You did not look at major cities over a certain population.
No, Mayor, I did. I did not bracket my population. I looked statewide through the 3 databases I had available, conveniently researched city ordinances. Each of those were separate databases. There was no overlap. It was the publishers of who publishes city ordinances. There are 3 major publishing companies in the nation. And I looked at those 3 databases. Some cities don't use those companies, and there are other reasons for the ordinance might not show up.
Related to that, City Manager, could you put up the graph that shows what happened as those cities that enacted it versus didn't add a density, and that study in the graph of what happened with a sampling of cities, and certainly not everybody.
Certainly, Mayor, you've got that loaded up there. Okay. The gray horizontal bar is the Texas average for registered sex offenders per 1,000 population. That number is 2.67. The green bars are 5 cities. Those 5 cities do not have any type of a residency restriction ordinance. And this is the then rate of registered offenders per 1,000 population in those cities. The first bar, the one most towards the left, is Houston at 2.53. Probably not hard to figure out that Houston drives a whole lot of averages in the state when you're looking at people. Amarillo at 2.63 is just slightly under the Texas average. You then see Odessa, Midland, Waco trending off to the right. Going to the blue bars, starting at the left is Louisville. That rate is 0.63. Laredo, 0.74. Wichita Falls, 0.77. El Paso, 1.41. Lubbock, 1.53. Again, those are rates per 1,000. Those are 5 selected cities that have such an ordinance.
Could you indicate when those ordinances were put in place for those 5 cities?
Lubbock's was 2008. Wichita Falls, I believe, was one of the earliest, and it was in 2006. El Paso's, I think, was 2008. Half a minute here. I'm sorry, El Paso was 2007. Louisville was 2008. And we don't have the date on Laredo, but I believe it was one of the more recent, likely 2009.
And Wichita Falls was when?
2006. Yes, 2006, Wichita Falls.
Any other questions from the commissioners? I'd like to. We can come back to commissioners who may want to get some more input after we hear from the audience. But is it appropriate this time, I think, to hear from the audience? Could we please ask for comments from the audience? If you could come forward, state your name and address. We're going to keep these to 3 minutes or under if we could, please. Anybody that has any questions or comments from the audience?
Hello, my name is Leanne Overstreet. I live in Oliver Eagle. And first of all, Commissioners, Mr. Norris and Mr. Atkinson, I'd like to thank you so much for your efforts in protecting our children. I have 3 small children, ages 4, 2, and 10 months of my own, and I would do anything in the world to protect them. So I am not here in support of offenders. In fact, what should happen to child sex offenders who are convicted is despicable, and my opinion on that is not probably publicly correct. It's politically correct, so I probably shouldn't say anything more about that. But I am here to encourage you to do more research on whether this ordinance is needed, encourage you to have more discussion on the negative consequences or the possible negative consequences of this ordinance, and to consider more alternatives. According to the Bridge Advocacy Center's 2010 statistics, only 1% of children who are sexually molested are molested by complete strangers. And as far as deterring sex offenders from living in Amarillo altogether, Johns Hopkins University Associate Professor of Psychiatry Fred Berlin said, if sex offenders out there want to commit a crime, it's not a matter of where they are living, they will go somewhere with access to a victim. And he's been treating sex offenders for more than 25 years. And in reference to the chart that you have there, comparing sex offenders per capita to cities without restrictions and cities with restrictions, I would encourage you to look at those numbers and find out how many sex offenders lived in those cities before those ordinances were passed. I think it might be interesting. I would also encourage you to look at the negative consequences. Will it push a concentration of sex offenders into non-buffer zones? What about the North Amarillo mom who is a single mom, lives in an apartment complex in a non-buffer zone, has 3 children that she can't be with all the time, or that she has to depend on a neighbor to watch? Are you going to increase the likelihood that there can be 3 sex offenders around her apartment complex rather than 1 because there's fewer places in the cities for them to go? Will it decrease property value? I'd like you to look further into that. According to Chapter 2007 of the Texas Government Code, titled Governmental Action Affecting Private Property Rights, an ordinance like this might require taking some impact assessment, a TIA. Has one been done, and does that law require one? I'd also like you to encourage or to look at alternatives. What about a widespread marketing campaign educating parents on the signs of sexual abuse? What about leaving out neighborhood watches and using those signs in the neighborhood that say, hey, a sex offender lives right next door to me? Could we encourage neighborhood associations to do that? What about educating landlords that they don't have to rent to sex offenders, and publicizing landlords who do rent to sex offenders, and publicizing where sex offenders live altogether? This is not a knee-jerk reaction. My husband and I are educated, concerned citizens, and I just would encourage you to look at passing an ordinance to prevent 1% of one crime. While this might prevent one child from being molested in a neighborhood like Sleepy Hollow, would it cause more children in a neighborhood like mine that's not in a buffer zone to be molested?
Thank you very much for your comments. We encourage anybody else who would like to make comments to come forward. Sorry.
Trina Foreman, 4427 South Hayden. I hardly agree with the lady who preceded me. Being someone who was sexually molested as a child, who was a family member, someone I knew, who lived in the house with me. I just don't see how restricting them to such a small area of the city is going to help overall. It might make us feel good like we're trying to protect people, but those people can walk, they can drive a car, they can go where they need to go to find someone. I just don't think it's feasible. I don't think it's a good idea because it's not going to stop them. It's not going to stop them. If they want to hurt someone, they're going to do it regardless of where they live.
One of the things I'd like to point out is that of the 500 people that are in Amarillo known, they were all caught. They were convicted. They were then released. The Bridge told me when I was serving on a grand jury that there's an average of 73 offenses average before somebody's caught. It is really a difficult topic because that would mean that those 500 people had 36,500 victims before caught. So if I take, in my mind, and I'm trying to learn about this, I heard some today that makes me question some of this, but I'm taking those people and saying, okay, now they've been caught, now they're released back out on society, they aren't going to have as clear an avenue to a family victim. I mean, we all know that a high percentage of them offend within families. We know that. I mean, it's just unquestioned. But now they're out looking for other victims, not as accepted by family members as they might have been. And so in our looking at the areas where they might be more, there might be more people, more children, we look at those areas where parents aren't as commonly supervising them as at their home. So it's just one of the things that we're trying to discern. Is this the best way to protect children? Is it complete? No. They've already offended. These 500 people have already, if the Bridges statistics are right, they've already had 36,500 offenses. And those are just the ones that are caught. It is a disease, it's a sickness, and we're not trying to fix that sickness. We're trying to restrict their ability to get to our children. Other comments, please. If someone, we need comments, so if you'd like to readdress it, I'll allow them. Is that okay with the other commissioners?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Jeanette Ritz with 4605 Oregon Trail. And I just have a question. I work with the Rental Housing Association here in Amarillo. And the majority of our landlords do background checks on our prospective residents. And oftentimes we'll see errors in the DPS database. And so my question is, are there any penalties built into this for a landlord who may unknowingly rent to a person who is within that? Okay, I'll just stop there.
I think Mr. City Manager, if you or Marcus could answer that.
Yes, it is recognized that the DPS database, not just their sex offender database, but their criminal history database, they have disclaimers on it that tell you there may be errors to further verification. Directed to your question about a landlord, and understand we cannot give legal advice to your association or individual landlords, but our research indicates that the Fair Housing statutes only address a landlord making discriminatory decisions on the basis of race, creed, color, sex, national origin, disability, religion, and familiar list. Sex offender is not a protected class.
Right, and we understand.
So if the landlord wants to say, I'm going to refuse to rent to you because your criminal history, you're a former drug seller or you're a sex offender, we found no penalty for a landlord making a decision on that narrow basis. And the fact that there may be an error, that's up to the individual offender to go to the state and get their records. That doesn't come back on the
But there's no additional penalties built into this.
To our knowledge, we're aware of.
Okay, that's all.
This is not based on what the landlord chooses to do or doesn't choose to do. The burden's on the registrar.
Thank you.
Ma'am, it looked like you had a comment after, and we encourage you to come back up.
Thank you. I just wonder, with regards to sex offenders who have not yet been caught, this ordinance wouldn't do anything to prevent them from living anywhere, and that's how it is right now. But I also wonder, with this ordinance, you might prevent a sex offender from living near a park or a school or a daycare. But we have a very mobile society. We can't prevent them from going to Jump and Jive, to the town club, to a city pool. We can't prevent them from doing that on a daily basis. And in the work session, you showed us an example of one sex offender on the database, and he didn't have a job, it looks like. So if they don't have jobs, they can certainly do these types of things every day, especially something like a city pool where it costs little to nothing to go. I wonder if the probation office can tell us whether the majority of sex offenders have family ties to Amarillo. If they do, then that's really not going to prevent them from moving to Amarillo altogether. If they have previous family ties here, the likelihood that they might come here anyway is high. I would like to know how many child sex offenders currently live in each of the proposed buffer zones. Because in 10 years, we all know that the turnover rate for sex offenders is going to be high.
Yes.
So in 10 years, in my neighborhood, where it's not buffered, is there going to be more sex offenders in my neighborhood because there's fewer places for those offenders to move into after they've moved? So will we truly be concentrating sex offenders into non-buffered neighborhoods?
Well, to me, that is really important. But you raised some questions I've made notes of, but I want to answer for my own personal benefit. And I think one of those is, for my vote on what I will do with this, one of those is many good ideas about educating people. I'm very involved with Scouting. We've dealt with this problem right up front. We're one of the hallmarks of solving the problem as best we can. And a lot of it is simply education. And I don't think there's anything to prevent us from looking at other things that would help educate and make the information more available. I don't think that, in my mind now, I think those are very good ideas to expand on this. This is one step that we know can help. There could be other steps. Any comments from the commissioners?
Oh, I just think that we all have the same goal in common, and that's to protect our kids. It's a very complex issue, and so the real question is, can we truthfully pass an ordinance, and I think we cannot truthfully pass an ordinance that will protect our children against a predator. I had a very wise child psychologist once say that you can't buffer your child from a sexual predator. That it's up to the adults to take care of children. But on the other hand, can we come up with some kind of ordinance that will keep a predator away from a child? I don't know. So we don't, without having some unintended consequences for law-abiding citizens. And this is a really difficult issue. On the surface, it sounds as if, this is something we should do, but I personally, change my mind 3 times this week. Hearing all the different sides to this. So I really invite this public hearing, and I want to hear everybody's ideas, and I think there's a lot to talk about.
One of the questions, I wonder what your thoughts are on this. If we know there's a majority of cities in Texas that don't have this, if there's 1,100 cities and we found 70 in a cursory search, We know that average then is from all the cities. It's 2.67. We're at that level. We're above it. My concern is this to a degree. Is I want to protect children. That's the only reason we're considering this. But if I'm on the other side of this and I'm looking at a map of Texas where there's 70 cities that have strong or stronger ordinances, as strong as this or stronger, I don't want to become an oasis.
No.
And so it's a difficult thing. I mean, I don't want to become a place where they don't see the scrutiny they might see in other places.
I agree. I live in Amarillo. I have 3 kids. I grew up in Amarillo, and I'm going to be in Amarillo forever. So I would want to know, is there something else in place other than the ordinance that's causing sex offenders to not live in that area? Are people more educated there? Are there other, maybe not ordinances, but acts that citizens do that prevent sex offenders from living there?
A good study question, very important question.
Well, and let me address one proposition that you brought up. We're trying to restrict where they live in close proximity to these targets. Like the candy in front of the person on the diet. You were talking about there's nothing, and you can't be, to prevent them from going around the parks and swimming pools, except for the fact oftentimes when they're sentenced, the judge will instruct them, you cannot hang around, and I'm not using legal terminology, but you can't frequent places where children congregate. And the judge puts that out. And if Chief Taylor or his police officers, and I'm not trying to put words in his mouth, and I'm not making this as that this is the case, but I would be surprised if you're not pretty aware of sexual predators, who they are, and they recognize them by sight. And when they see them hanging around a swimming pool or an arcade or a park or walking around and around and around the school ground, I'll bet you that they'll pick them up.
And I think that I'm not an attorney. I don't know the law. Leave that up to my husband. But I think that's true while they're on probation. But I don't know if that's true, Mr. Norris. When they're off of probation and they serve their sentence, can they be prevented from being around those types of places?
And I'm not a criminal law specialist, but to my knowledge, no, that's part of the problem. Why Texas sometimes, why cities sometimes choose to adopt these types of ordinances is to continue those residency restrictions after they're no longer subject to the judge's order. They complete their probation or they go on the sentence.
But as long as they're on that list,
Right.
they would be, they have to obey.
And have there been any studies done as to whether it forces a concentrated number of sex offenders into non-buffer zones and whether there's more incidents of sex offenses in those neighborhoods after the ordinance is passed?
That's one we tried to find, and we've not. We have found some stuff that was not related to one of these ordinances, but rather to the presence or lack thereof as it regards property value. And most of those studies refute each other, but I've got one that if the mayor wants me to start to speak to it briefly, I would like you to. There's a 2006 study done by the National Bureau of Economic Research. They picked a city, I believe it was actually in Indiana, and they studied the effect of, again, the presence or lack thereof of the sex offender on property value. What they determined in that study was that within 1/10 of 1 mile, 528 feet, there was a 4% estimated decrease in property values. That study further went on to admit, though, that at 529 feet, there was no impact. They referenced that in certain cases, the presence of a registered offender immediately next door could have up to a 12% increase. In the situation Amarillo has today, there's no mechanism that left of the street, right of the street, north or south. So, I mean, probably the better of those studies. They studied victimization costs. They estimated per victim cost of $1 million, and then they admitted in their own study at that point that was multiples of what typical studies had found. So, I wish there was a better, newer study. I wish there was one that I could find that talked about, we haven't found one that speaks of the of the fact that it will cause concentration or that it will not. The closest we've come is that the typical consumer, regardless of who they may be, if they have a $750 budget, they're going to live in a $750 home. And these ordinances don't in and of themselves have any impact on affordability or lack thereof.
And truly, property values are not the main concern.
Sure.
But it is the safety of children who don't live in those buffer zones, and whether a concentration of sexual predators are going to be in those neighborhoods, and probably in low-income neighborhoods where single moms or single dads don't have constant watch over their children because they're at work and they have to depend on their neighbors, rely on their neighbors to watch their children, perhaps people that they don't know very well, or even are leaving their young children at home alone. That's not an ideal situation, but we all know that it happens. So I'm not as worried about my kids as I am about those ones in those cases.
In my mind, based on what we've heard today, in mine alone, I would say that I think this is a piece of the puzzle, but it's not comprehensive. And I don't know that there is a comprehensive ability to deal with this problem, but I think that we could probably go a few steps further to figure out what we can do in the city to legally protect our children and do things. I've heard concerns by other commissioners in the work session, heard concerns by citizens. I still believe, though, in my mind, and this is so people can challenge this or give me more information, I believe personally that this is an important step in part of a comprehensive plan. I still believe that this is viable, but I don't want to say that it is comprehensive at all. I don't think it is. Didn't think it was before, but I also would say that I don't think it's good that we rest on this and say we've solved the problem. We have not solved the problem. The problem is very complex, as Commissioner Green said, and it's far sweeping. And one of the things that really worries me is these people that do this are devious, beyond description. Beyond description. They try to psychologically work through this. They find avenues of weakness. They deal with it. We've fought it in the volunteer organization that I've been involved in, and they are unabashedly convinced they're not doing anything wrong. They are sick people.
I agree that you might be right. It might be a very important first step, but I would also encourage us to do more research before going forward.
I think that that's a good idea. I would suggest that we study this further before putting on the agenda next week. I think it requires us to be able to answer these very important questions that have been brought up. As best we can. It may be a first step. Mr. City Manager, how do you feel about that? If we look at some of these questions that obviously raise questions in our minds, are we really affecting this? Or are we throwing something out that may not protect children as much as we might think it? I think this step could protect them. That's my view. But I think there's probably other things that could augment this too.
If I could, I know we're in the midst of receiving public comment, but would it be agreeable to ask the chief to come up and let him say what he and the police department see this ordinance as doing and giving? And we again, and they're true, the very vast majority of these offenses are committed by people of trust, have a trust relationship, but that's not always the same group. As you mentioned, family situations that changed, and I think in my mind, in very simple terms, what this ordinance would do, should we choose to proceed, it does not fix anything in and of itself. What it begins to do is work on the probabilities of making access to gain that trust possibly a little bit easier. So, Chief, would you speak to?
Really, I think one of the questions that we got speaks most of what my train of thought is the question was, I gather that most children are safety molested by people they know, people who have been gaining their trust, a family member, a coach, a teacher, a Boy Scout leader. And the question was, do we agree with that? And that's correct. And so why do we believe that creating a bubble or a buffer zone around these predators where they can't live will protect children? Well, I agree with that concept that it is a friend of the family, a family member. And so when that person is caught, and they will no longer be in that position of trust with the family whether they're a family member or a family friend. And so if they're going to offend, I think using a little common sense question then becomes, what better place is it for them to now gain a little more trust with the child than at a city park, a school, or a place where they have ready access to children? Studies indicate up to 50% of these people are going to reoffend. It's down as low as 5%. So the studies are all over the place on whether they're going to reoffend or not. But if they are, they're going to do that by gaining that child's trust. The psychiatrists will say that these sex offenders have some kind of craving disorder. And so I think it just makes good sense that we don't allow the child sex offenders to live at a place where they have ready access every day. They're in their homes, they have ready access to these children. If you take them out of that environment where they don't have ready access, then there is a possibility that they're not going to be able, they're not going to offend, or if they're a predator, they're going to go out actually looking for children. If they're living there and they have ready access, then they may be enticed more than normal to go out after these children. If we take them out of the environment, there's going to be a chance that they're not going to do anything. It's not a cure-all, and it's not something that's going to solve the problem, but I think it will help the problem. And I think that ordinance does tend to help get them out of that environment.
I think the city can raise public awareness, but there are certain things the city can't do either. I mean, we can pass an ordinance that has this effect, but we can't fix them psychologically. We can't protect the children if the parents aren't watching and educating children. So there are points that we fall out of our purview, and yet I wonder if we studied enough the things that we might do. We had a meeting with a community group this week, and from Plymouth, Eccleston, one person raised a question. And Mr. City Manager, I don't know if you had any time to research this, but is there anything where you could say, okay, in the zone that's not protected, is there any density restriction you could put on that?
We did do, the limited time we have, we've tried to look into that, Mayor. Right now, we're not finding a precedent for that. I think further, if there were, that is likely to lead you into something, the complexity of which to enforce would actually begin to work against it.
That's another question I'd like to ask the Chief. This is a moving target, so people will move in, move out, they'll open new daycare centers, build new schools, new parks, those kind of things. Do you have the manpower to keep up with something like this?
Well, certainly, it is because we will work with the police department. As you know, we are adding manpower to the police department. We are right now going to be hiring a part-time person to handle more of the clerical work, so that the detective that handles these things will have more time to make verification on addresses and that kind of thing. I think if the ordinance is passed, we will need to make more frequent efforts of verifying the addresses. And I think we can handle that as long as we continue to add more manpower to the police department.
Thanks, Chief. I want to tell you, I so appreciate your perspective on this. This is a complex, science-ridden issue, research that produces lies, damn lies, and statistics. But I have to say, I've been doing this now about 5 years. I have never been prouder of this city and city staff at the level of research they've done to try and do the right thing. We've looked at a lot of data for this, and I just want to thank you personally for that.
Yeah, it's surprising that the data that's out there is really all over the map. It really is. And, so it is hard to draw a conclusion.
It's a multifaceted problem, and I do think we need to protect kids, but I also think that part of the facet is to help try and treat and fix the sickness.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure we avoid the law of unintended consequences and giving people a false sense of security and taking them out of their support system.
Well, but I think that might fall in the purview of things that the city can't control. I do think that, it's great to say we can cure them, but I don't think the city can. I think the city can restrict residents. That's where I'm at with this right now. It's a discussion. We're still debating several points, and we will continue to. But I'm saying this publicly so we can get response from people.
With the waiver, I think that those kind of considerations where we have a person who needs a stable environment that we know is going to treatment, there is a process where they can live in one of these areas once the board looks at that and is satisfied that there's not going to be danger.
And that was with a parent or a sibling, an adult sibling, and so on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Any other comments from the public? John?
Good evening, good mayor, good commissioners, good city staff. Thank you so much for this opportunity to give your name. Oh, sorry, John. I'm John Lutz. I live at 2106 South Tyler. I also serve as the president of the Plymouth-Zackville Neighborhood Association. Our association has not come to either a decision on whether we would support this or not. We have a lot of questions. And I think some of those questions fall in line with some of the comments made earlier about what are the possible unintended consequences of this. How might our neighborhood be affected by a higher concentration or a migration, if you will, of sex offenders across the town? I would ask that further research be done into those possibilities and what we could do in the ordinance to protect some of those unprotected areas. We fully applaud your efforts on our city's behalf to protect our kids. We're anxious in our neighborhood to revisit some of the older days when you saw kids playing on the sidewalks and having that feeling of security. And so we appreciate all your efforts in that light. Thank you.
Thank you.
John, I might respond. This is a work in progress. And I think that there's been adequate media attention to the board as this progresses. And I think as we come to the finalization of an ordinance, and remember it'll have to be approved twice, I think there'll be plenty of opportunity for analyzation, input, results of what we found, and things that we simply don't have an answer to.
It could be totally separate discussions from this ordinance too. It doesn't mean we're our responsibility to help protect kids as much as we can as commissioners of the city. So, but in my mind, still, I am convinced we need to do something in this regard. That one chart that shows cities without and with really concerns me. I don't want to be an oasis for these people. I want to protect our kids. Yes, ma'am.
April Lemming. My address is 3212 Marlin, and I'm also the executive director for the Bridge Children's Advocacy Center. So I felt like I should speak since everybody's mentioned the bridge. I know that Ms. Overstreet tried to contact me earlier and wanted me to speak, and so I am speaking for you as well. And I do applaud your efforts in trying to make our community safer. I truly do. But I definitely echo the concerns that Ms. Overstreet has. And I know on a personal level, not my professional level, my husband and I recently purchased a home that I know won't be in a buffer zone. And that is a concern for me. I know that we looked up to see how many registered sex offenders were in the community before we bought that home. So I feel like we're not the only ones who probably do that. So as a citizen of this community, it would be a concern to me it would affect where I purchased my home if I was not in a buffer zone. But the other parts that you guys have mentioned over and over again, I really do recommend more research, that you actually contact registrars in the other communities who have these type of ordinances to see what problems have they encountered with that. Has it been successful? How much manpower does it take? And I know I've been with the Bridge for 17 years, and within my job, before I was executive director, I was an interviewer, and I've interviewed more than 5,000 children. And of those 5,000, I would say less than 100 were sexually abused by strangers. So it is the small tip of the iceberg. I truly think that education is the answer. That many times, I think if we have these buffer zones, my concern would be that parents would have that false sense of security, that they would think, oh, I'm in a safe place. Because what I find when I go and do community education programs is that most people don't want to talk about sexual abuse. They're reluctant a lot of times to attend those when they're offered for free. This is not a comfortable subject. But parents have to be the front line of defense. They have to be the ones that are talking to their kids and opening up those lines of communication. Because it's going to be not the neighbor, it's going to be the person that you invite in your home.
Question for you, and you may have to get back to us on this, but I'm curious, do you know the number of people that are perpetrators that you all are dealing with, the victim, the percentage that are offending after they've been convicted, and those that it's the first time they've been caught, they're not convicted?
We don't really keep a statistic like that, but what I'll say is that most of the time it's brand new offenders. I mean, 90% of the time.
This leads me to the next question. We can't find them with an ordinance. We can't discover who they are.
No.
Once we know who they are, and they're forced away from families to a degree where they offended, and they're looking for other victims and not cured, that to me raises the distinct effort of our commission to try and restrict where they're at, and at least not, let them go to parks and let them go to schools. And I think those standards were not set frivolously. Those places were places where we recognize there's not as much parental supervision. Now, I don't know that it's the right thing, but I think we really got two different classes of people here, offenders. We got those that have been caught, and we got those that haven't been caught yet. And really, we can't do much to identify and find them if they haven't been caught. Once they've been caught, though, I think they need to be dealt with totally different. And identify them and restrict them and protect the kids from them as much as possible. And that's really where I don't really agree that we can't do something. I agree that it's complex, but I think the ones that have been caught, I think you restrict them from any kind of association with kids as much as you possibly can. The exceptions that we can write in with the review board to help when there's a support system with family. Dr. Eads talked about that today, and I think it is an important point. We have to deal with those people and try and get them some help to a degree, but I look at it as two different classes.
And I think that you would also need to have some conversations with sex offender treatment providers to find out what their perspective is on their potential for re-victimization. Because there's, as Chief Taylor said, there's a lot of different things out there that statistics that show that re-victimization, if they're in treatment, they're much less likely to re-offend. So that's why I was glad to see that you guys are at least considering those waivers. I think that that's important. But as Ms. Overstreet said, they have cars, they can drive, they can go to those parks, they can go to a school ground, they can go to those places. Just because you say you can't live there doesn't mean they can't go there. And there's no way. I applaud the efforts of the Amarillo Police Department. I work with those detectives on a daily basis, and I know how much they keep on top of where those sex offenders are living, where they say they are. So truly, the danger is not so much because at least we know where they are. I know where sex offenders live close to me, and it makes me more aware. If, as a parent, I would be more aware and go, okay, this makes me aware. If I think, oh, there's no sex offenders in my neighborhood, I'm good to go, that's a false sense of security because it's just not true.
Do you have any opinion on why the cities that we saw that didn't have ordinances have a higher rate of residents of those per thousand versus the others? Do you have any opinion about that? The ones that have a restriction and have had it in place longer obviously have a lower
and I'd like to
person per thousand.
I think it's a good request to look at those cities before the ordinance, compare the before with the after, and also compare those populations to see, because you might have, if you put Pampa up there, it might be very different as well. To compare those, those are all more major cities. So,
I want to ask April a question because she has 17 years of experience, and I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. Are you saying that this ordinance that we're talking about today has more problems and brings more problems than solutions, or are you saying that it may be maybe one good tool, even if it's not the only tool? Which are you saying?
Well, I came tonight to find out more. So the waivers were things that were interesting. I also want to know about why those cities have lower. I think I would need more information I'm definitely like you, on the fence about whether this is an effective tool to prevent future victimization of children. I doubt that.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else?
Hi, I just wanted to thank y'all for doing this, and I support your efforts.
Excuse us. Name and address.
Susan Rogers, and I'm 6 at Southwest. And I just wanted to tell you how much I appreciate this, and I'm leaning towards the mayor. Everything that you said, I agree with.
Ma'am, I can't quite hear.
Oh, I'm just saying that I agree with what you're saying. I feel that we need to limit the access of sex offenders to our children. And I don't understand how having them housed across the street from our schools, our daycares, public parks is a good idea. They have the opportunity at that point to observe children all day long. It's not like driving a car up where people will see you park the car at a school ground. You're living there. You have access to these children as they're coming and going up and down the sidewalks. And it's just a different environment in a public park in the school. A much higher concentration of children in those areas trying to walk home without supervision. More opportunity for someone to intercept them and try to befriend them. I see that as a problem. I understand that people coming up and are concerned about concentrations and zones that don't have buffers. We already have concentrations of sex offenders heavily concentrated in our lower income neighborhoods, heavily concentrated in very high numbers. And they are represented in every neighborhood, and if people would go look at that, they would see this most likely won't change concentrations. They're not going to go buy a house in Sleepy Hollow. They have restrictions as to their income perhaps. These concentrations will probably stay the same, maybe due to the lack of availability. They'll choose another place to locate. I am curious about whether or not the numbers on other cities with regard to having the ordinances is deterring people to come in and try to locate at that city due to lax restrictions. I think that's an important subject. From what I read about sex offenders, many of them don't change throughout their lives. They always have that attraction to children. Logically, you would remove them from children and not have them have that close access that they would have if they had the opportunity to live right across the street. Those are my concerns. Just offhand, some more ideas to think about it. But anyway, do you have any questions? Is my time up?
You have about 4 seconds.
Oh, okay. I brought an article, Mayo Clinic, Johns Hopkins. Very interesting to me. Thought it might help you.
You can pass it to us. That'd be fine. Thank you for your comments. Anyone else? We want to kind of wrap this up. We may do it again, but other comments.
Dan Rogers, 506 South Lipscomb. Just sitting here listening to the comments, I'm somewhat appalled that people would be opposed to this, but I think everybody's seems to be missing the objective here. It shouldn't be that you're trying to solve the problem of sex offending. What, to me, the object is to hassle these sex offenders and to make it to where they do not want to live in Amarillo. That's what it's about. You want to make it miserable for them to be a sex offender. You don't want to make it easy for them to live in this town anywhere. And I think that's what's being missed here. We're all trying to say, well, are they going to offend or not offend? That is not your or my or anyone's ability. It's about making it miserable for those criminals to exist in this area.
Thank you, sir. Any other comments?
Real quickly, my name is Joseph Hayes, 12,000 Ranger Trail. For what it's worth, some thoughts on statistics and cities that have the ordinance and cities that don't. I would theorize it looks like this is a classic game of kick the can, and the cities are, playing hot potato with sex offenders until there's nowhere left for these guys to go, and then, they'll probably just come right back. So if it is a solution, I think it's probably a temporary one, because the real problem isn't being fixed. If they're moving, then that's one thing, but they could, very well come back eventually. I mean, if every city in Texas does this, they're going to have to go somewhere. It could very well be, just outside city limits. So, something to consider.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Troy Kim, 7714 Stuyvesant, and thank you for the work that you're doing. This is one certainly good thing that has come from this is we're talking about a subject that needs to be talked about. In the United States, 1 out of 3 girls before age 18 are sexually abused, and 1 out of 6 boys. And those are hard numbers to get our heads around, but they're very real. I think that while efforts of ordinances like this are laudable, we do have to look a little further into it, because there are definitely some unintended consequences. And what we know about the recidivism rates of sex offenders, I'm sorry, I didn't tell you, I'm a counselor in private practice and a sex offender treatment provider. I've interviewed hundreds of child molesters, and have been doing this for about 20 years. And like April, I can count on one hand the number of folks that were in fact strangers. And so my biggest concern about an ordinance like this is what we call externalizing the threat, making people feel falsely secure in their neighborhoods. The big scheme of things from my perspective as a provider is education. Help people understand that it's not the boogeyman. It's probably, if you look at the numbers, 40% neighbors, 27% family members, and then it just goes down from there. So the real issues that we have to address here are we going to increase instability? And offenders that we know are prone to higher rates of recidivism when becoming increasingly unstable. The other point I'll leave you with is when I interviewed sex offenders and said, how do you do this? How do you target kids? They came back with 3 key things. The first one was this. They listen to kids. They intensely target children, and they build rapport and trust. We call it grooming. And that's what they do, and they do it very well. The second is they pick the least assertive child. And so in there is a lot of educational opportunity right there. Families need to know that we should be teaching assertiveness, teaching. See, the problem is we're terrible at picking who the bad guy is before they offend. We can't do it. Science can't do it. We can't do it. So we got to change the model. And while ordinances like this are, I think, laudable in so many ways because the intent is right, but we got to look closer at this, because if this increases instability, then we may have actually made things more dangerous for kids.
You said 27% by family and 40% by neighbor.
40% by neighbors. Actually, in a book I wrote on the subject, it's 40% neighbors, 27% stepfathers, and about 25% uncles. So what we know about this issue across the board is this is a family systems matter. Now, those cases of strain reduction are horrific, but truly, a child has a greater chance, a much greater chance, of being abused by someone that they're in a knowing, caring relationship.
But this neighbor point is somebody that's that's looking for neighborhood kids.
Well, more importantly, someone that's in a relationship, friendship type of relationship with the parent or the caregiver of the child. So what I usually say in seminars is think about who you would invite to your home for a picnic, for a cookout. And unfortunately, those are the persons that families need to be considering first and foremost.
But once these neighbors or kinfolk are caught and adjudicated, don't you think that ostracizing is the right word or the proper word? So be it. But at least they're identified and they're required to tell us where they're living, and we're going to restrict where they can live. I can't connect the dots on all this.
Well, I think that from my perspective, a couple of problems with that. One is actually the recidivism rate on offenders are not as obscure as perhaps was stated. The Texas Department of Health, the Center for Sex Offender Management, managed by the National Institutes of Justice, all rate recidivism at about 13%. 13%. Now that's absolutely contrary to the myths that offenders are just out there reoffending ad nauseum. But that's actually good news because that tells us that something's working. And the reality is, if a child is molested in Amarillo tonight, talk to a sex crimes detective. They're going to canvass the neighborhood and look for the registered sex offenders. But everybody that works in this business knows, chances are, it's a family member or a friend of the family.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Timmons, I have a 2005 Florida study that concludes that there is no empirical evidence on the effect of proximity restrictions on recidivism. Are you aware of any, since you're in this field, are you aware of something more recent than this 2005 Florida study or of an empirical study? We've been trying to do our research.
Sure. Yes, sir. I do. Jill Levinson, who's a researcher in Florida, has done some work.
We have a
study. One of her studies I'm referring to, published in the International Journal of Offender Therapy and Comparative Criminology.
As recently as 2010, Dr. Levinson has updated some of that information. Right. And I think that what's relevant from her work and her colleagues, one of which is in New Mexico, is that there's no, at least as of today, empirical evidence that these types of ordinances, although well-intended, are having really any impact on the rates of recidivism. And you can also extend that argument to just registration itself. I agree, we need to know where these guys are. We do. But we also have to be careful not to increase the instability in their lives, because that actually makes it more dangerous.
Can I ask a quick question? Sure. In your best view, what could a city do to, help protect children, help with this problem?
Well, again, back to what I've learned from interviewing offenders, they pick on the child's need for unconditional regard, and they manipulate the relationship, and so they groom and set up and again look for that relationship and make it very unique and very special. So in the educational component, we need families to understand, first of all, that no ordinance, no agency can can replace the parent's role, the caregiver's role. And because what the offenders that I've interviewed over the years, that's the thing that we consistently come upon. Is they come in and they manipulate and take advantage of a relationship and perhaps the need for that child's attention. So education across the board.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate your input. We may ask you for more input in the future. Anyone else? We have gone a long time. I'd like to move from. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Carolyn Gordon, 1947 South Mars. I agree with the ordinance. I'm a minister and I have worked with criminals, and I have talked to child molesters, and I have heard their stories, but I understand something that very well. I agree with this gentleman here. This is a very, very serious matter. And I appreciate the city doing something about it. I really, really do. I hear from the criminal side of it, from what they've told me, is that they're sorry and they're so dismissed by the public. No one wants to touch them. It's almost like they're lepers. Well, what can you say to that? Except, we're talking about touching our babies. I don't care how old they are. They're touching our babies. So there is a serious consequence for that, which I have said that. It's a serious, terrible thing. But I want to say that ordinances are very, very important, and the laws need to be strengthened. And I think it's a very it's a sickness. It goes deeper than I think people can even understand it from what they tell me, and I think this gentleman can understand that as well. But I also want to add something too, and that is we can't dismiss the parents' responsibility to watch over their children. I'm appalled when I see so many parents that leave their kids here, leave their kids there, or I'm at the park walking or running, and I see parents just leave their kids they're at the swings, and then they go off and running, and they leave their children. And I think the parents' responsibility is a huge issue too on protecting their babies. And I agree too about that it's family members as well as neighbors. And these people that I've spoken to, they are very, very smart on how they can get to these children. And that's all I want to say. And thank you.
Thank you. Chief.
Mayor, taking so long, just one more thing. He is right, the council is right. There's going to be probably these timid children. And we're better to locate those and be able to stay them from the comfort of your home or your neighborhood where there are a lot of children around. And I'm just thinking that if you can keep these offenders away from those areas, it gives a less chance that they're going to get. Most of them are not kidnappings. They are where they develop a relationship with these kids. So I doubt we're going to have a lot of kidnappings and that kind of thing because of the ordinance. It's really restricting their movements in these neighborhoods, keeping away from these kids where they cannot develop that relationship.
Thank you, Chief. Okay. Can we move on? Susan, I'm going to ask, unless it's something that hasn't been covered, we need to move on. We'll have other meetings, but you did have time in mind. Is there something else that is quick?
Just real quick. I was just going to ask you in the process to consider, and I don't know how this ordinance could affect transient sex offenders, but we do have those that are living on the street, camping and living all day in parks, and camping in alleys behind residential.
We are considering that as part of what the chief has talked about, how they have to address. They have to register, so we will give that.
That could be another critical and important.
We'll give that consideration. Thank you. We have considered it. Okay. We could close the public hearing on this and we'll move on to the consent agenda. The consent agenda is recommended that the following items be approved for the city manager to be authorized to execute all documents necessary for each transaction. A, award of modular playground purchase and installation. B, acceptance of 2011 Homeland Security Grant Program award. Are there any items that need to be removed by the commission for separate consideration? If not, I'll entertain a motion. Mayor,
I would move we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Okay.
Any comments about the consent agenda? All those in favor of the consent agenda as presented?
Aye.
That passes with a 4-0 vote. Okay. This concludes the agenda for the regularly scheduled meeting for the Amarillo City Commission. However, we will go back into executive session. It's customary at this time to allow citizens of this community on matters pertaining to city policy, programs, and services to speak to the commission. The floor is open, but I would ask you not to reopen this public hearing. It's about items that are not on the agenda. Thank you. Any other comments?
Joseph Hayes, 12,000 Ranch Trail. I just have a couple of requests from the council today. First one's really quite simple. I would like to ask that the street signs marked Northeast 24th, Northwest 24th be replaced with street signs that say Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. Now, I realize there are some signs already in place, but I think it would be a tremendous benefit to the community to go ahead and do this. I think it's a pretty simple request. But would you be opposed? Would you all be opposed to this idea?
We just refer to staff and see what their answer is.
Okay. And the second request would be perhaps a little bit more difficult. I would request that the council make an amendment to a specific city ordinance. An ordinance concerning public food safety. Okay, could the council allow a provision for individuals and religious groups with no financial gain to feed the public without the license?
Again, I'd refer to staff. There's a lot of data that would have to be studied. The health department. We just refer to staff.
In other words, allow people and churches to feed the public legally.
Well, my first blush on that personally is no, but we'll refer to staff.
That's all I have.
Okay. Anything else? Thank you, sir. Anyone else? And if not, we will move back into executive session. Thank you for being here today. We very much appreciate the input.
Now, I could have moved up there if I lived up there for 6 months. And of course, I didn't want to move up there, and I tried to even get it to the kids. They didn't want to mess with it. And so